All right. It is 6 o'clock at the top of the hour. Tim, do you want to wait a few more minutes for people to catch up, or do you think we can begin?
Yeah, go ahead and start. I mean, this is all pretty basic, and we're going to have these recording, so we'll send it out to everybody if they ask for it. So please, it's your show, Eli.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Elias Assas, and a little bit of background information about myself. I graduated college in 2018 with a degree in cybersecurity, and I have about several years of penetration testing experience. As soon as I graduated college, I acquired an internship in penetration testing, and I immediately merged into the field seamlessly. Sorry. All right, let's get started. We will be talking about what a penetration is, or what a penetration test is, or in short terms, a pen test. We would then be going over setting up a Kali VM on a Windows 10 host using Vmware Player. You may use Mac OS too. Tim will go ahead and put up a link a YouTube link up there in chat to make sure that those who are on Mac can follow instructions on how to set up a Kali VM on Mac OS. But we will get to that point. So let's begin. So the first thing we want to know about what a penetration test is what exactly is it? What does it entail, right? By definition, and there are many definitions of what a penetration test is, but overall and briefly, a penetration test is an authorized simulated cyber attack on an information system or a company's target system in order to determine how strong or how weak their security posture is. We want to make sure that we are identifying all weaknesses and all vulnerabilities, as well as strengths, to determine any mitigations for those vulnerabilities. But a penetration test is usually packaged with a security assessment. Nonetheless, a penetration test can also be by itself. A company may just order a penetration test just to see how well their security posture is. You may see out there that a penetration test may align with a red team assessment, but to make sure that there's no confusion, penetration test and a red team assessment are two different things. They have two different goals. A penetration test tries to identify all kinds of vulnerabilities and strengths, along with any kind of weaknesses like misconfigurations, maybe security awareness, and things like that, just to determine how secure a company is. And there are many types of penetration tests that are usually with security assessments like FedRAMP assessments, FISMA assessments, maybe something with NIST, PCI DSS, et cetera, et cetera. There's many compliance guidances out there that include a penetration test with their assessments. So moving on. Oh, and I would just like to add, if you want, or if so, please wait to ask questions until the end of the presentation. Maybe something in here may answer, or maybe something I talk may answer one of your questions, or you could just enter it in chat and I will review it at the end. So moving on, there are three types of penetration tests, or pen tests. First, the first involved is a black box test. Black box testing involves no prior or background information about the information system in scope. We do not know anything about what the target system is or about the company. We assume that we are starting from scratch and we are trying to gain knowledge on a clean plate. Then we have a gray box. A gray box test usually contains characteristics of both black box and white box scenarios, and we'll get to white box in just a second. A gray box also may involve some information of the target system provided. For example, you may have credentials to pretend that you are an employee of the target system of the company, or of the company you're targeting, but you will not have credentials that, you will not have administrative credentials. You will have basic credentials, and you would try to maybe escalate from that point, or something. You may get like, a list of network hosts, maybe just a little bit, but you won't get everything. You'll get some material, but not all. And then we have white box testing. White box testing involves that the tester have full or all information about the target system at hand. You know everything. You have administrative credentials to the cloud service. If it's a cloud service provider, you will have domain creds to get you to the domain admin. You may have a network mapped out of the entire corporate intranet or the corporate network. You will have devices that are listed at hand for you to maybe research and see if they are out of date or if their OS is out of date, et cetera, et cetera. You will have all information at hand for the test. If you will also like to see or look at the differences and similarities between each, you can also look at this article on medium.com. It is for me, this would help me understand what black, gray, and white box testing are together. Moving on. So then we're going to move into the phases of a penetration test. So just like any kind of compliance, there are cycles to a compliance assessment, but there are also cycles to a penetration test. So first, we're going to start off with the pre-engagement phase. This is one of the most overlooked phases of the penetration test. This is where the penetration testing company will outline all of the logistics of the test, any kind of legal implications, the objectives and the goals that the customer would like to achieve. Much of this information can be covered in a document known as the rules of engagement. Basically, in a cool sense, I guess, this document will serve as the pen tester's get out of jail free card. This is very important that you have this signed prior to any kind of active testing that you're performing on the target. You do not want to be called red-handed without a signed rules of engagement. From my personal experience, I have a coworker who informed me that if he had not had a rules of engagement on him while he was performing his physical test, he would for sure have gone served jail time. Thankfully, he had the rules of engagement with him, and when he was caught by security and/or police, he actually was able to get out of it. They contacted the supervisor, and they ensured that the test is authorized, and he was authorized to perform the activities that he was doing at the time. So make sure you have the rules of engagement signed, and you are performing the activities within the defined scope that are outlined in the document itself. But after the pre-engagement phase, we move into the reconnaissance. During a pen test, there are two types of reconnaissance. You have your active reconnaissance and your passive reconnaissance as well. During your passive recon, in this sense, we are not directly touching the target system directly or the company network directly. Passive reconnaissance involves researching the target via any kind of open source intelligence gathering or OSINT. Here we leverage as much public information as we can find and use it against the target. So we can go on Shodan.io, we can go to Census.io, IP info. Maybe if you're given a list of OSs, you look on CVE details or versions that they give you about what the services they're running. You can also go on National Vulnerability Database on NIST.gov. Maybe you might want to check out some social media websites to gain more information about the employees that work there in case you are doing a phishing campaign. You might want to check, have I been pwned, to see if the emails that they are using for their contact information was involved in a breach, right? And there's also a thing called Google dorking, which is using Google queries to acquire information that is, I would say, more precise than a broad range of results, right? And another thing that people do, or that pen testers do in the physical assessment, is that they might go dumpster diving, and that's technically public information, but also invasion of the company premise. So it's kind of iffy there. But a popular tool to help automate this process, besides dumpster diving, is Recon Ng. And right there is the GitHub repo link to Recon Ng. And I highly recommend looking at it, trying to play with it, and make sure that you are just using the passive tools on Recon Ng. I don't think there's any active tools on Recon Ng, but just for your sake, just do the research and just make sure that you are within scope prior. But it's a really good tool. I highly recommend it. So then we move into active reconnaissance. Now, active reconnaissance involves mapping out and enumerating the target system or probing the target to gain information. This is when we're actually touching the system or we're sending packets to their network, and this is where we attempt to enumerate ports, services, versions of those services running, configurations, active hosts, and more in order to identify any associated vulnerabilities or weaknesses to help achieve that initial foothold. And that initial foothold is what we're trying, it's what we want in terms of getting access to the company network. But then we move into threat modeling and vulnerability identification. Here we try to identify where would it hurt if we hit them. What are the attack vectors? In threat modeling and vuln identification, we try to identify high-value targets within the company and map out the associated attack vectors. We attempt to identify vulnerabilities through footprinting, scanning, and research, and determine the exploit path from there. After we have done our threat modeling and vulnerability identification, we go into exploitation. This is where kind of the fun stuff begins. Basically, our goal in exploitation is how far can you go in exploitation, and but first, were you able to gain that initial foothold? When you get into exploitation, we're talking about all kinds of attacks that are associated with the vulnerabilities that we discovered, of course. We're talking about web application attacks, network attacks, any kind of memory-based attacks like stack buffer overflows, Wi-Fi attacks or wireless attacks, zero-day angles if you are into exploit development, physical attacks. You'll see, we'll get to some of those later on. And you'll see social engineering like phishing campaigns. Maybe you're trying to impersonate somebody. And we want to make sure that gaining that initial foothold on the company system or any target system is the key when we're trying to go for exploitation. After exploitation, we move into post-exploitation analysis and recommendations. So after you exploit a target system, what more can you do? How far can you go? What level of access can you reach? This is where you also document all the steps that you took to gain that initial foothold, including any exploit code that you might have used, all the enumeration, etc. Can you escalate privileges? What can you access as the current user that you've got? If you have acquired if you have acquired access as a service account, like Apache or maybe an FTP user, what can you do with that account in order to compromise an escalation of privilege? You want to evaluate the risk, especially. You want to perform risk analysis. Is the finding that you have discovered, is that a low, moderate, or high finding? And there are different models out there to help you determine the risk, impact, and likelihood of the vulnerability that you have discovered in order to exploit to get you that initial foothold. This is also where you want to provide any recommendations to mitigate or remediate the risk. Are there service updates? Can you perform multi-factor authentication? Is there zero trust involved, etc.? But after we have done so, we then move into reporting. And this is one of the most important phases of a penetration test. The report should show your clients, as a pen tester, but it should show your clients how entry points were discovered from all the OSINT and the threat modeling that you have conducted, as well as how they can remediate the security issues found during the exploitation phase. Keep in mind, this is very important, keep in mind that your report should be able to communicate to security engineers, developers, along with executives, managers, and directors. So you want to be detailed in your work when you are relating to a security engineer so they can go more in depth and investigate how to remediate the finding per your recommendations. But you want to make sure that you may include an executive summary, as a lot will call it. And this is where you identify all the findings, what risk levels they were, maybe the name of the findings, and you will give them an overall assessment or brief statement of how the security posture or how their security posture is. So then, in a penetration test, we talked about attack vectors. And in my experience, there may be different names for the different attack vectors at hand. But in my experience, there are 4 different attack vectors. We experience external, internal, physical, and wireless attack vectors. From the external standpoint, can you break your way from the outside world? Can you sit on your authorized pen test station, and from your network, can you penetrate through their network via the open internet? Can you go on their web app that they're offering, and can you possibly gain some kind of foothold through there, like any kind of remote code execution? Maybe you've identified a leak in one of their accounts to allow you to gain access to their web apps, and that may help you escalate into a foothold, et cetera, et cetera. Or you may want to perform phishing. Social engineering comes in key to this because a lot of popular attacks or popular breaches actually involve social engineering. In my experience, it only takes one person to allow an exploit or to allow an attack that could be detrimental to the company's posture. We then move into the internal attack vector. This is where you may have credentials to their VPN site, but nothing else. This is where you may simulate a compromised user account or a drop host. What my company does is we send a drop host typically to the company's internal network. They set it up. We confirm that we have access to the internal network, and we go on from there. Or keep in mind the scope. You do not want to forget the scope. With the internal attacks that you are performing, can you escalate privileges to the active domain within the defined scope, of course? Can you find any vulnerable services within their internal network? So let's say if maybe you have a vulnerability scanner within the drop host, can you perform that vulnerability scan, and can you identify any vulnerable services? That may help you in your test. Then there is the physical attack vector. Can you get into company property without getting caught? Maybe you may do it at nighttime, and I've heard of people using lockpicks, of course, but also using compressed air and cardboard in order to get inside a company door, because they're using motion detector sensors. Many of those are vulnerable to allow the door to be open from the inside or to be unlocked, because they're tricking the motion sensor to be unlocked from the inside. Once you get in, is there a server room? Can you steal any laptops, hard drives, flash drives? Can you drop flash drives to maybe trick a user to plug it into their computer? And then we also go into wireless, which is kind of fixed or mixed in with physical, in my opinion, because wireless is on company property. But then again, so isn't their internal network. But with wireless, can you find a way into their corporate network by compromising any wireless access point that they may be running? Can you perform a man-in-the-middle attack and maybe trick a user to logging in to your, maybe Pineapple is what we call it, but maybe to your wireless access point, and trick them to giving them your credentials so you can log into their wireless access point. Moving on. So then we move into the types of the attacks. So there are countless, and I want to say again, countless of attacks that maybe a pen tester can perform if given the opportunity, and of course, if defined in the scope of the rules of the engagement. But in future sessions, we're going to be going over these, and we're going to dive deep into each one of these. But with web application attacks, we're going to be talking about vulnerable web servers, outdated Apache versions, maybe Nginx versions, any kind of like custom server that's up, maybe cups or something of that nature that allows you to perform remote code execution without even having to visit the site. You may just be able to send packets that allow that contribute to remote code execution, and you can gain access to that way. Then there are also vulnerable WordPress plugins. A lot of sites, especially e-commerce sites these days and a lot of blogs, they utilize WordPress. And WordPress unfortunately has plugins that are constantly being researched into and finding 0 days. 0 days are just new attacks that arise from the community and that no one has yet to see, mainly because it is discovered after a vulnerability has been identified, right after a vulnerability has been identified. Then you can also go into local and remote file inclusions. You also have cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, XML external entities, Java deserialization, SQL injections. These all will help you in some way achieve that initial foothold. You want to be careful with those too. So we move into the network attacks. Is there an outdated service of SMB that the target system is running? Have you find an exploit code to the recent vulnerability that was discovered not too long ago? I think it was about a year ago. The blue key vulnerability involving the remote desktop protocol. Can you attack LDAP in any way? You know, is there something, a misconfiguration with the RPC service that's running? And in a few or later down in this presentation, we'll show you, or I'll show you the demo with zero logon and why it's important to update your domain controller. You also have FTP. Is there a backdoor running? There is a popular service called VSFTPD that is vulnerable to a backdoor depending on the service that is running. Can you enumerate services on SSH? Or if you found credentials online somewhere, can you log into the network system as or via SSH, right? And then you have your memory-based attacks. The most popular known memory-based attack is your buffer overflows. And then you also have your wireless attacks, your handshake captures. Can you, if the service is running WPA2, can you capture the handshake between the clients and the wireless access point? And can you crack that key, you know, with a hash cracker or maybe an online hash cracker even? You also have rogue access points. Now, rogue access points are typically attackers posing as with their own wireless access point. And this is where we have the man in the middle or the evil twin attack. This is Pineapple access points are typically involved in this. I have a Pineapple Mini. I use it to perform my own evil twin attacks just to see if or how dangerous my network could be if I were to potentially have my credentials captured. Is there a layered defense beyond that? And then there's also attacking the WEP protocol. WEP is vulnerable to an initialization vector vulnerability where the cryptographic vulnerability where if you collect enough IVs or initialization vectors, you can potentially get the key from that. And it's very, very uncommon to see many companies use Wep nowadays. All right, moving on. You also have your zero-day angles if you're into exploit development. Your physical attacks. A lot of these are very popular. You can check them on Hack5. Bash cloning, you can use a Proxmark for that. There is a GitHub repo to help you install the updated firmware for that. You also have lockpicking. Lockpicking is very fun. There are many conferences out there that actually help you train your lockpicking skills, and there are many training sets out there to help you identify where you have to pick especially, and you can gain your experiences from that. It's really cool. I highly recommend it. Then there's also USB drops, which are somewhat part of your social engineering. If you drop what we call a rubber ducky, which is a malware-infected USB, can you trick someone or maybe drop it on the floor of company premises and have potentially a user from that company plug it into their desktop and execute malware right then and there? You can have a backdoor. There's also shoulder surfing. Can you watch someone type in their passwords, right? Can you see them? Can you see the information that they're on the web page they're on, if they're accessing company-only networks, or any kind of resource that is only on company network? And then you also have dumpster diving. Dumpster diving can be a sense of doing your research and seeing if you can find any kind of company records that may be thrown out that could be useful in your attack or in your test especially physical tests. Then we go into social engineering, and this is where phishing gets greatly involved. You have different kinds of phishing, of course. You have spear phishing, which is a targeted type of phishing campaign. You also have vishing, which is phishing, but but via voice. You're calling someone. So all those, we believe that your car has surpassed its extended warranty calls that you may have gotten. Those are possibly vishing campaigns that are being conducted on you. Maybe they're not even authorized, and they're definitely probably not allowed. There's also smishing, which is the SMS or your text message version of phishing. You're like, oh, you surprisingly won $1,000. Click this link or press this link to continue. That's smishing. Or that is a form of smishing. And then you also have whaling. Can you target the executives of the company into giving you their credentials? And by being a CEO of a company, I can imagine that you will have a high level of access to company resources. You then also have impersonation. Can you impersonate as a company's IT guy, or maybe a vendor IT guy, or maybe a vendor employee that a company uses? You also have tailgating or piggybacking, which is trying to get into the door by sneaking in when someone else is going into the door. When an employee is opening a door, can you sneak in behind them? When I was on site for a project, they required you to actually scan your badge and watch the light on the badge reader go green in order for you to enter. They make sure that you are not following someone behind, or you're not following behind someone, sort of sense. And you also have your watering hole. Watering hole attack is it's essentially tricking company users to accessing a website that they go to, or that they typically go to like for their vendor websites, but you're tricking them and you are executing maybe malware on those web pages that they go to. And then you also have your client-side attacks, which involve session hijacks. Can you retrieve someone's session token? And then you also have credential harvesting. Can you capture someone's credentials via cross-site scripting attack? All right. After we have gone through the information of of what a penetration test is, we will be going through the basic setup of the Kali VM. I believe Tim has the link to the YouTube setup for those who are on Mac OS. I'll try to include that here and then send out a PDF if anybody would like to read over the slides again. And you will also have the link to that video. So first, for this activity, I'm going to be using my Windows 10 machine as the host OS. For definition, the host OS is what you're running the virtual machine on. Then I will be using VMware Workstation Player. Some of you may be using Oracle VirtualBox, maybe VMware Fusion if you're on Mac. And we're going to be using the current Kali VMware image that is on their website. And then we're going to go through the steps real quickly. Just download and install VMware Workstation Player. You're going to extract the VM of the Kali VM image from the website using 7-zip. So you want to make sure that you have 7-zip installed. After so, you're going to import the VM into your hypervisor. If you're using VirtualBox, you're going to import it correctly. And then after we have configured the VM settings, we are going to make sure that you change your user password on the Kali VM. And you also want to make sure that you change your root password. And then after so, you want to make sure that you also apply any updates. And later down, you'll see that we're just going to run sudo apt update or apt update if you're root. Also, for the steps, there will be Linux terminology. If you are not familiar with Linux, that is okay. If you have questions about what a simple command is, just put it in the chat, and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. So first thing we're going to do is install VMware Workstation Player. You just go to the site with this link, download for Windows or for Mac or for Linux. Or I believe Workstation Player is only for, Linux and Windows. That's right. For VMware Workstation Fusion is for Mac. And then you're going to, after downloading VMware Workstation or the installer, you're going to run the executable, and then you're going to install using default settings. And we're just going to make sure that we keep everything basic and default, so that way we have a foundation of what we're going to be doing in future trainings. All right. After doing so, download and extract the Kali VMware image using 7-zip. You, of course, you want to identify which what kind of operating system you're using. Is it 64-bit or 32-bit? 7-zip is just going to have the selection there for you. If you're using a 64-bit operating system, just select the 64-bit installer, and you should be good to go. Once 7-zip is installed, simply just drag and drop the Kali image onto wherever you like, your documents, your desktop, your downloads, and yeah, it's very simple. If you have any questions, please let me know, as I know my first time doing this, it was kind of hectic. I did not know what I was getting myself into. All right. So by importing, or in order to import your Kali VM, you're going to start VMware Workstation Player, and you're going to select the default option, which is non-commercial use. You should be able to get the personal free license on the VMware website. It should be free. I don't think it's not free. Do not do commercial. That will cost you money, of course. Let's see. So next, we're going to navigate to the top left corner of the window, and you're going to select Player, File, and Open. After doing so, you're going to navigate to your Kali VM image, and you're going to open that. And then after doing so, you should have the Kali VM in your library. I don't think there's much to it after that. This is just with VMware Workstation Player. I think it's somewhat similar to VirtualBox. And then configuring your VM settings, I like to run it with 4 gigs of RAM and 4 processors. I think what I do is I use 2 cores, and I use 2 processors per core. It will be an option for you to select with that. You can use up at least 40 gigs of hard disk space. I suggest 80 or more, but 40 is enough. 40 is plenty. And then we're going to go, and for my sake, or for my simplicity's sake, I'm going to be using NAT. And the difference between NAT and Bridge, and NAT stands for Network Address Translation. So it's going to be using the network card that your host operating system is on. So you're going to be sharing the IP address with the host OS. So whatever you go, when you go to Google, it's going to recognize your Windows 10 or your Mac or your Linux machine's IP address. Or yeah. Bridged is going to make the VM act like it's its own host, and it's going to give it its own IP address in your home network. So if you are monitoring network traffic, you should see a separate IP address for your current, for that virtual machine. After doing so, we're going to launch it. On VMware Player, you can just double click, or you can right click and press power on. And then once you have reached the desktop login, if you have kept everything the same and you downloaded the image, it should, your username and password for Kali should just be Kali and Kali. And that's why we want to change it, because that's default. Don't want to make sure, we don't want anybody to getting in there on accident or on purpose. So simply to do so, changing your password for root and the Kali user. After login, you're going to navigate to the terminal window that should be on the top left. If you go over, it should highlight just terminal. And then right out the box, you're just going to type in the command password. It's going to ask for your current password, and then you're going to enter your new password. And then after doing so, you can type in sudo su dash, or I say tac L, and this will elevate your privileges to root. And so after doing so, when you become root, do the same thing. There is no current password for root by default, so all you have to do is just select your current password. It's just take note or keep note of the password that you're using. All right, then we can update our Kali VM. If you are the Kali user, the command to do so is sudo apt update, and then followed by sudo apt full upgrade or disk upgrade, and I use a -y in between because it will prompt you if you want to successfully complete the update or complete the upgrade, and it will prompt you to press Y or N, yes and no. If you're root, you don't have to use sudo. You could just type in apt update and then followed by the upgrade command. At this point, you can also download any installs using apt install or whatever installation or program that you want to get from the internet to help you ease into the Linux VM. All right, so now we can finally get to our demo, and we are going to walk through what I found out, not I found out personally, but what helps me in my assessments. It's called the Zero Logon Vulnerability. This was discovered last year by Tom Turbort. This link right here is to the white paper that he posted. It's a really good read, but you do not need to read the entire thing. I highly recommend, if you are interested, read the portion of the net logon capability in the logon. That's where the vulnerability is located at, is the net logon capability, where you don't have to sign in. You don't have to use credentials. You can just pose as the domain controller service account, and you can actually just change the password because net logon actually allows you to do so without being authenticated. So the example that we're going to do is that we're going to be going through, we're going to attack a box called active, and it's on hackthebox.eu. And if you are not familiar with Hack the Box, I highly suggest you give it a shot. It is one of the first it is actually the first place I went to starting my penetration testing experience. And it gets you into the rhythm of the methodology that you will use to attack a box. So you will perform your basic scans, your enumerations, and then you perform your exploits, and you escalate privileges if needed. It's really good, really helpful, and everyone there will tell you in the community forum, try harder if you are stuck. There will be hits, but that's the main motto, right? Try harder. All right, so let me get into my VM. All right. So I'm going to be using a Windows 10, in my case, a Windows 10 virtual machine that I have on my rack server, but this is identical to a Windows 10 machine on a laptop or your desktop. So we're already in the Kali VM, right? So I'm going to log in. My login is default. I know I should change it. Let's see. So just want to make sure that I am connected to the network that. All right, cool. So what I did just there, I pinged the attack, the target system IP address. This is me confirming that I'm still on the network, because when you're on Hack the Box, you will have to VPN into the Hack the Box network in order to access the machines that are on it. A VPN is a virtual private network. It basically allows you to connect to an internal network that is not your own, essentially. So you send traffic from your home network to what we call a tunnel connection and then the packets come out of wherever you're VPNing into. We can dive deep into the later, but for now we're just going to stick to the demo. And if you have questions about it, just simply email me, or you can put in the chat and I'll try to answer. So I'm going to be using ls. This will list the contents of the current directory that I'm in. Now, when we're attacking a machine, one of the first things I do is perform an Nmap scan. Nmap is a network mapper utility tool that allows you to map out a company's network or a target network, or even identify services on a machine. Because we're not attacking a network directly, we're just attacking a machine, all I did was scan the host itself. So right here, I'm going to type out cat services.nmap. So services.nmap is the output file that I save the scan results to, and I do this just to save time. But cat allows you to print any kind of file contents a file may have, whether that be a Python script, a Ruby script, it may be an HTML file, whatever it may be. It would allow you to print the text contents of the file. All right. Let me see. Let me also bring up the PDF. This is the proof of concept PDF that I also wrote, just for my sake, so I know what to do next time. For the prerequisites for attacking this machine for the zero logon vulnerability, you will need Python 3, and you will need the current version of Impacket. I believe at the time that was tested, I was using 0.9.21 plus. This currently affects Microsoft Windows Server 2009 and below. And believe me when I say that there are still companies out there that are using Windows Server 2003. Yes, I have encountered companies that are still using old Windows servers. It's common. They update those servers as much as they can, and they also apply custom patches. But I always recommend updating to the most current version of Windows servers if you can. So the first thing we're going to do, and I've already performed these actions, but the first thing you want to do is you're going to remove the current version of Impacket that you have on your Kali machine, because we want to make sure that we're going to update to the current version. And by doing so, we do a command called Git Clone. And Git Clone is a tool in Kali that allows you to clone a repository on GitHub or any Git repo that you can connect to. So in this case, we are Git cloning this URL. So I can zoom it in right here. And this is going to be the current version of Impacket. Once you have done so, from that same directory that you're in, you're going to cd, which stands for change directory, into that directory. And the directory is going to be by default called Impacket. And then once you have done so, you're going to run a command called pip3 space install, and then you're just going to put a period at the end. The period at the end will assume the machine is going to run the setup.py file. So after doing so, after you have cloned the GitHub repo, we're going to perform the exploit. So in order to do so, looking at the scan file, or the mmap scan, we need to know the Active Directory, or the domain controller name, the DC name, which is DC, my bad. The host name is DC. And then we also need to know the IP address of the host. So in this case, we know that the IP address is 10.10.10.100. All right, so let me ls again. ls list of contents. You can also do ls tag l to put in a list format. I'm going to cd into the directory of the exploit, which is this one right here. This is where I cloned the repo for the exploit code. So I'm changing directory into that GitHub repo that I cloned. I'm going to ls, and I look at the files that I have at hand, and I'm going to run Python 3, then the Python scripts, and then I'm going to put in my arguments, which are the DC name and the DC IP, which is the domain controller IP and the domain controller name. Python 3, that should be it. I just pressed right arrow to complete that whole thing because I've previously done this. All right. So right now, it's currently performing the authentication steps via the net logon ability. And if successful, we should see that the exploit has worked and that the password for that domain controller service account has changed to an empty string. Now, with this, you're able to do countless of things, but we want to dump any kind of hashes that we can gather so we can perform additional post-exploitation. So because we have installed the current version of Impacket, and like I said, we can dive deep into this and this whole thing about what Python 3 is. If you are new, I understand. Trust me, when I was in college, I did not understand a thing. And to this day, there's still countless of things that believe me, I should be learning, or I need to learn. So we're going to run, not Python 3, not bad. Secret dump space dash just dash DC, the D, and then we're going to put in the domain controller name, \$ $@ symbol, and then we're going to put 10.10.10.100. All right, this allows us to capture or to dump the hashes on the domain controller itself. All right, it's asking us for a password. Because we changed the password to empty string, all you have to do is just press enter. And look at that. We have successfully captured the administrator hash itself, and we're able to use that in a further post-exploitation attack that we're going to do. So after we have captured the hash, we want to make sure that we write down or copy the LM hash along with the NT hash. And these are the hashes that Windows puts in format. So then we're going to run this next command. And just to remind everybody that you do not need to be root in order to run these commands with these in-package scripts or the exploit code itself. You could simply just be a user. And in some sense, that can be dangerous because if you're performing this on an internal network and you're only given a user account, you don't need to be root. You can just use the service account or the user account that you are using. And also depends on the permissions that you're given. And we can dive deep into that later as well. So then we're going to run Wmi Exec Pi, which is another impacted script. And for this, we're going to need to know the domain name. And then we're going to enter /administrator at the DC IP, the domain controller IP addresses. And we're going to use a technique called pass the hash. And the reason why we're using pass the hash is because if we try to run this, let's say into a hash cracker, it may take days, weeks, months, even years to crack these hashes. With pass the hash technique, you do not need to crack the hash. You can simply pass the hash that you're given and allows you to perform authorized or authenticated actions with just the hash itself. So then we're going to write dash hashes, and then we're going to give it the LM hash and the NT hash separated by a colon. All right. So then the domain controller name according to our nmap results is active. We're going to put that in. So I've typed out Wmi Exec Pi space active /administrator at the IP address that the domain controller is on, dash hashes, and then the LM and NT hash that we are given. All right. Press enter. All right, and voila. We have gained what we call a shell, a terminal shell, a command line interface to the target host. So if I put in a command that typically one would put in order to identify who they are when they connect to a shell, I am the administrator of active. So I have just compromised the entire domain controller right then and there. I can do whatever I want now. I can dump more hashes. If not, I can also expose user accounts. I have control of the entire domain. If you want to perform extra post-exploitation, one could also just enable RDP or remote desktop, and you do so with this command right here. And let me just put this here, and we can do that right now, actually. Need a text file because it's not. In order for me to copy and paste this, I have to make sure I'm copying from the Windows machine. Oh, there you go. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control A, select the entire thing. I'm going to Control C. And then I should, let me see if I can. File, nope, not file. I'm trying to paste this. Let's see. Oh wait, there we go. Sorry. All right, so now we have the remote desktop protocol command, or to enable remote desktop. Remote desktop is just allowing you to view the desktop, a GUI version of the target system that you're attacking. or the target system at hand. It doesn't have to be the target system you're attacking specifically. But if we run this after pressing enter, we have successfully enabled remote desktop. So now, I can just type in a command called rdesktop, and we're going to rdesktop into the target host. We're going to just press yes, and we have remote desktop capabilities. This account will not work because Kali does not exist on the target machine. If a user named Kali exists on your target Windows machine, I will be concerned. I will be concerned for the company itself, or they just may have it just for as a dummy account or whatever it might be. All right, so let's go back to that PDF. So now we can enter as active/administrator. But the problem is we cannot simply enter without a password because we did not change the password of administrator. We only changed the password of the DC service account. And that allowed us to dump hashes for the administrator. But let's assume that we cannot crack the hash in a reasonable time. But we do have full control of the entire domain. So all you need to do is type in a command, net space user. You're going to put in the user that you can change if you have permissions to the username. In this case, is administrator, and I'm going to type it out a new password, just called password123, exclamation point with a capital P. Command's completed successfully. So now we know the password. We have changed the administrator password. Password123, exclamation point. And we have now desktop access to the target system at hand. And in Hack the Box, you're trying to go for these flags called root.txt. And you also may encounter flags or text files called user.txt. And that helps you identify if you have gained the right user account in order to access, and also the root or the admin account. But from here, you can do anything. You can control the Active Directory itself from here. You can do it from the command line. And yeah, that's basically the demonstration for zero logon, the zero logon exploit. I have used this once and have shown clients that they need to update to the most previous patch, or to the most recent patch. They have released, Microsoft has released one patch back in August or September, and they will release another one. Actually, I think they already released another one in the beginning of February. So if you know someone who is not using the most current version of Windows Server, just politely remind them that they need to update, and that's all they need to do. The recent patch will prevent the ability to not use assigned or not use authentication for the net logon ability. All right. So this. And that is it. Thank you so much, guys, for attending. I will be looking at questions. Tim, do you have anything that you might want to add? Or
Thank you for the demo. That was really good. We did have one question so far from Thomas Marshall. He said, about what percentage of your engagements use drop hosts? And this was back when you were discussing kind of what you do and your engagements.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see. We have one drop host that we send out for the engagements that require a drop host. So we call it a Z-box because that's just the name of it. We use it quite often. We ask the company what the preference for the internal attack is, whether that may be VPN, or if we need to be on site, or if they would like a drop host. And surprisingly enough, more often than usual, they will actually prefer that we send them a drop host, because I don't know the reason why specifically, but I think, I don't want to give the exact number, but on average, I would say about 10 engagements a year, we send drop hosts to our clients. And 10 engagements, I would say on average.
Okay, thank you. I'm also looking through here, the rest of the questions were just asking if this was going to be recorded, which it is. I'll give about another minute or two to see if anybody else types any other questions, or if anybody wants to come off of mute and ask a question, that's also fair game at this point as well. So we'll give another couple minutes. If nobody pipes up, we'll politely end this meeting, and we'll post this video to our meetup. So if you guys want to download it or view it from there.
Sounds good.
And while everybody's kind of, if they are thinking of questions, I want to add, our next videos aren't going to be as advanced as this demo, so don't be scared away from that. We're going to be starting with some more simpler stuff and working into the fun stuff. But just FYI, keep that back pocket. It's not going to be too crazy from day one. This was just a demo of what you can hope to achieve after you kind of go through this course with us.
Yes, we will dive deep into many topics because there are just so many. And what I experience in my field is what we call imposter syndrome. And that is basically saying, you think you do not know enough, when in reality, you know more than you think you do.
Yeah.
And it hits everybody. It hit me. It still hits me to this day. It hit everyone when everyone that I talked to in conferences and all the security conferences. And that's why we all like to support each other and help each other learn and grow at the same time.
Right, absolutely. Okay, looks like everybody's just kind of thanking you for this excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Eli.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like there's no other questions. So everybody, thank you for coming. Eli, I'll let you close it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for coming. Please ask any questions if you must. If you want, I'm going to try to make this a PDF. Tim, do you have that YouTube video for the Mac OS setup, or did you already post it?
Yep, I've already posted that. Thank you for bringing it back up, guys. I did post the YouTube video if you're a Mac user. That's a fairly good video. I'm a Mac user, and I've had to, use YouTube religiously in different documents to try to figure out what works and what doesn't, because you have different versions of VMware Fusion. Just play around with it, utilize YouTube, do your due diligence. But then also, if you're a beginner and you're having trouble with like some Linux commands, like he was showing cat and cd change directory, stuff like that. I did post in the chat, www.linuxjourney.com. It's a very good website for just learning Linux. It's a gentle introduction. It has some quizzes, very, very simple quizzes at the end. And that way you can do knowledge checks just to make sure you're getting the information you need. But that's all I have. Thanks, Eli. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate this, and I love spreading what I learned in my experience to everyone, especially those who want to become a penetration tester, or anybody in the cyber field in general.
Okay, we're going to end this. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.